Don't stay on the path. We'll get to the image you're looking at in a bit. Okay, this video is a departure from my usual content. If you're going to stay, please lower your expectations and simply expect to be bored. If you're interested enough to listen, and if you can be patient enough to sit through a point that's probably going to take me a while to make, then you might profit from something that took me a long time to realize too. Okay, that's enough disclaimer. I don't owe you an explanation at all, let alone an apology. The purpose of this content, ultimately, is to help you to save time, even, ironically, if it takes some wasting of time in order to get there. 𝐹𝑖𝑛𝑑𝑖𝑛𝑔 once famously said, quote, "People want economy and they will pay any price to get it." Don't be like that with your time. If you start to think that I'm wasting too much of your time in order for you to come to realize something that isn't all that profound, then just turn this off immediately and go listen to something else, something of value. But before you go, consider that there's this funny thing about the profound. You'll usually walk right by it or around it time and time again without being able to make use of it. Sometimes the simplest truths in life are hard-won, meaning that they require a lot of force to ever get pounded into your head. The simplest, most valuable things in life are also the most underconsidered. Here's one example of a simple truth in life: parsimony. Not parsimony as in being thrifty, but the principle of parsimony, as in a philosophical razor, like being thrifty with the complexity of something. Sometimes this idea is called Occam's razor, and what it means is that whenever you're trying to find an explanation for something, you should probably choose the one that requires the fewest assumptions. Think of it this way: the best mousetrap is usually the simplest one. Let's mention a few too simple and obvious truths here, just to get started. If this is new to you, you'll probably have a reaction to the following solutions that's something like, "That's not a real solution." But if you're still being plagued by any of the following problems, then you probably haven't allowed the simple truth of it all to alter your behavior. Yet. Okay, here goes. Ask yourself how to cure poison ivy, or fruit flies, and back pain. The most obvious solution to poison ivy is to not touch it to begin with, but you knew that. But where everybody really messes up is by not washing up with soap and water after handling it. See, the stuff on poison ivy, the stuff that gives you the rash, it's something like an invisible motor oil. And you can totally scrub it away from your skin if you get to it within a reasonable amount of time. But after the rash has started, nothing short of steroids will help you. Soaps, treatments, and stupid old folk remedies like bleach have zero effect. The only way to cure poison ivy is to wash it off with soap before it starts to become a rash. Fruit flies? Well, you could make a trap for Drosophila melanogaster with an old Erlenmeyer flask-shaped jar that has some water in the bottom. Any jar with a bell shape, like some olive jars, will work just fine. Since the surface area of the liquid inside is big and the flask's mouth is small, the trap ends up dissipating a concentrate of rotten fruit through the opening that kind of directs the insect in. Add a drop of dish soap just to reduce the surface tension of the water, and the bugs will drown if they touch it. Bait the trap with a few pieces of floating old apple or banana. Vinegar doesn't seem to work. Oh, and a final touch. Cut a balloon so that its round part is gone, but you still have the rolled sleeve part. Stretch the donut part of the balloon over the mouth of the jar and allow the sock to dangle down into the flask. Doing this will keep any upward moving flies, well, trapped. You'll get a much better kill rate. Or You can just wash your fucking bananas as soon as you get them home from the market and avoid this whole rigmarole altogether. Learned this harsh but too simple lesson about 15 years ago, after having already invented and refined the previously mentioned flask fix. Back pain. I'll tell you the answer, but you won't like it. You'll roll your eyes and tell me that this doesn't apply to your unique circumstances. Yeah, right. Well, 27 some years ago, I hurt my back so badly from carrying shingles that it hasn't been normal since. On top of that, medical opinion points to a genetic defect that seems to exacerbate the problem. So I think I'm in a position to make a reasonable generalization on the subject of back pain. What's the only thing that works? Don't say chiropractic either. In university, I finished out my natural science program by doing an in-depth research project on the subject. So a gracious listener will trust me when I say that the discipline is superfluous to medical science at best, and quite often it's outright quackery that's supported only by psychological manipulation. You know, like the placebo effect and stuff. You know what really helps my back? Diet and exercise. A strong diet gives you the energy and clarity of thought that you will need to support an active lifestyle that will strengthen your core enough to take the strain away from your back. But I'm sure you won't accept this explanation for your back pain, which is why you're still squirming from it. All right, I've given you one of the secrets to life. But that really isn't the piece of wisdom I want to share with you. Wisdom was in sarcasm quotes there. The next piece of wisdom isn't really the key insight here either, but the point is that I always thought that it was, and so for 20 years or so, I just kept saying to myself, don't stay on the path. What does this mean? Well, for years and years and years, as we explored rural areas, I held this as an axiomatic truth. Don't stay on the path. So I vaguely remember this interview where some guy had become literally filthy rich from the garbage removal industry. When he was asked about the secret to his success, he sort of laughed and said, "After high school, I just went in the direction that nobody else wanted to go." Cue the Robert Frost poetry. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Okay, I know that's a total cliche. It's the sort of thing that you'll read on a bench plaque along some gravelly trail that approaches nature in name only. My point is that I haven't been using the lesser used trails over the last 20 years so much as I've been trying to leave the trails altogether. And that has made all the difference. I mean, I've seriously found some hidden gems by going off path. It's a lesson that I've learned again and again and again. And even still, even knowing this now, I still often have a feeling of reticence whenever I'm stepping off and into the unknown. There's this terrible natural reluctance for us to deviate. Whether it be following a path or authority, conventional wisdom, what your mom says, what your friend believes, or the acceptance of hard evidence in the face of your present erroneous beliefs. Taking on or in something new is tough. We just don't like dissonance. We prefer the calm. The image you are seeing right now represents the path less traveled. The path less traveled will take you to places that are usually unavailable to most people. Note the words usually and most there. We'll return to that point, but right now it's story time. Our setting is the mid-90s, and our story begins in an old beat-up car that's filled with 4 young men, 3 of whom with long hair. And no, I was not the oddball. We had been driving through the Laurel Highlands for a few hours now, in search of a sort of teenager's Shangri-La that we'd heard about from somebody, somewhere, at some point. Back then, information about the locale surrounding your familiar home area was considerably less available. It's easy to forget now that we once had to use road maps and street signs to navigate, rather than just looking down onto your magic screen that points the way. For this reason, because it would be so easy for you now, listener, to find the Shangri-La of our story, I will give you no such idiot-proof directions. If you want to find the place I'm about to describe here, you'll have to use clues. If you do reveal the place's location in the comments, I'll delete it. I do want you to find the place. I want you to experience it. But I also want you to come to it with the same appreciation, the same mystique, the same reverence with which I first saw it. Okay, now let me tell you why the place is magic to me. The feeling of being a young man is the feeling of being lost. There was no direction, there were no rules. There was no indication of just what I was supposed to be doing with my time, or my life. Rules seemed arbitrary, and most proved to have exaggerated consequence. Developmentally, this is the time between social awkwardness and recklessness. It is the place where we first learn to shirk care in exchange for status. Young men will tend to find something to cling to so that they can mask their insecurities, and then from that safe feeling, they'll mount their exploration by taking risks. Some risks pay off, but others end up charging us for our arrogance. Looking back at the apparent confidence of my three companions, I have no doubt that they were just as uncertain as I was. The feeling of being lost is laced with fear. The ride had gone far beyond the point of giving up. I didn't think we'd ever find it. We were driving down dirt roads that had no names. The houses here were more like sheds, shacks, and cobbled-together trailer assemblages that my comparatively snobby rural sensibilities found repulsive. In 2 words, we rode through ignorance and squalor. Following the Civil War, the cultural South somehow inched its way above the Mason-Dixon line, to all the way up to here, to the area where we were now searching. Add in a dash of culture shock to the feeling of being geographically lost. And let's not forget the teenager's overwhelming sense of being lost conceptually. And now you're getting the sense of just how desperately I wanted to find this Shangri-La. The place we were looking for was called Blue Hole, but that name won't help you to find it. It sure didn't help us. See, there are several blue holes in western Pennsylvania, and the one we were after turned out to be one of the lesser-known ones. At one point, I remember sticking our heads out the window and yodeling, "Blue hole! Blue hole!" After completely giving up, we stopped at a station to get gas, where the boldest of our party asked, and I'm not even kidding, he asked a cop if he had any idea where Blue Hole was. While the remaining 3 of us, shocked at the gall of it all, sort of looked away skulkingly. Probably because cops were the enemy, and half of us likely had things in our pockets that could get us even more, well, lost. "You mean the hollow? It's right down this way. You'll go so-and-so, and you'll turn so-and-so. Probably busy today. Be careful down there." Smiles, confusion, pure exuberance. We were revitalized. The drive down was pure, strange anticipation. Down, down, down into the valley. The road was a dusty rock crawl. So many cars parked at the top, but plenty of vehicles made it all the way down. At the bottom, just as we had been looking for. It was a teenager's Shangri-La. Party groups everywhere. Dune buggies, jeeps, dirt bikes, and quads everywhere. Pickup trucks shuttled people along the creek as a service, threading together the various party circles and swimming holes into a single tapestry of pure festive chaos. At the center of it all was the tranquil-looking place you're looking at right now in this slow-moving picture. Blue Hole. Set aside the wild distractions for a moment. The swimming hole itself is nearly unmatched, or at least it was. The water was clean, warm, and blue-green. The jumping spots are abundant, with varying heights. The rope swing is the center attraction. That and the point, which is the medium-high rock jump that'll dunk you safely into the deep center of the hole, and still give you an easy return swim to shore. There was once a narrow steel bridge spanning the entire creek, and it may still have been there on my first trip, but I don't remember. That bridge jump was the star attraction for a while, but it has since been removed. Parts of it still remain, and you can walk out onto them to get a good view of the swimming hole. Evidence of a once bolted diving board still remains on the point rock. And there was another, slightly higher jump too. It was on what we called the root, which was a thick root growing atop a large rock face that was on the opposite side from where everybody hung around. The root was a somewhat advanced jump because it's high enough to sting the undersides of your arms, and it's a bit of a challenge to get over and up there. The highest jumping point of all was from the tree. I'll return to that in a bit, but first I want to continue painting the picture of just what was going on around here. So let's continue our drive further down into the holler. We'll come back to the main swimming hole later. The road here, which is more like the most treacherous and abused single-car lane dirt trail that you've ever seen, runs approximately parallel to the creek, and it stays at an average of about a distance of around a hard stone's throw from the water, give or take. The road is above grade by a good 30 degrees, so it offers a peak here and there at the water, which makes it easy to scope out potential swimming holes and party spots. On each side there is improvised parking, and every so often the road forks up for a side trail. One split like this quickly returns to itself in a pointless needle eye, just to take you through a deep puddle from which a jeep is currently spraying thick chocolate milk-looking water everywhere. All of this is an actual recounted memory. I'm not making up any of the scenery here. You and I are now riding in the back of a pickup truck, and it's filled to the top with other, mostly young, people as we travel downstream on this hot summer afternoon. We're packed into the bed like a load of watermelons, and we're scared shitless. The driver is having way too much fun being reckless, and I suspect he's a little bit, at least, intoxicated. There's a second truck that's in front of ours, and it's also carrying a full load of passengers. The experience sort of reminds me of the Racer roller coaster. You know, the one that's on a Mobius strip, so that either of its two cars might arrive first? Well, on this ride, I'll be happy just to arrive at all, because the combination of speed and bumpiness is easily enough to launch someone out if they aren't holding on. But we did hold on, and the entire truckload is pure smiles in spite of the danger. None of us know the passengers next to us, but we hold on to them nevertheless. Culture was different in the mid-90s. Consider that most of us had grown up in the arcades, roller rinks, and shopping malls. Kids still used actual telephone calls to communicate, and so we were already used to making brief small talk with semi-strangers. Imagine being in a video arcade and waiting for a turn to challenge the winner on a Mortal Kombat machine. First, you would line up your quarter on the lip of the screen, and eventually somebody would ask, "Who's up?" to which you would reply, "Me!" Then the other kids around you would gently push you forward on the back to guide you up to that colossal screen where you'd get your chance to be the star of the moment. A one arcade match was satisfying in a way that you can't understand by comparison today, no matter how high your positioning is on the worldwide leaderboards. Girls in the truck smile back at us freely, with no amount of discomfort. It was an easy environment for making friends or for finding a love interest. Class, education, and political affiliation carried no emphasis here. The admirable trait was friendliness. Downstream, half a mile or so from Blue Hole, the road ends in the water. More accurately, it would be to say that the road continues on the other side, so we'll have to cross. It looks like there was a railroad crossing or something here, because there's some sort of concrete road-like structure that still has railroad tracks holding it together. Somehow, I remember us driving on top of this thing, but a more recent view of it doesn't understand how that's possible. Holes in recollection forgiven, our truck seems to easily keep its speed as the truck in front plows away the water for us. It's like one of those stock car drifts that you can physically see. To our right side, other vehicles are deliberately trying to make a more challenging crossing, and it looks as though a blazer-like vehicle is dead in the water. Looking back on where we just came from, this is as far as the cars and go-karts can go. And there are lots of go-karts today. In fact, I've never seen anything like one of these until now, but there are at least a dozen here. They have roll cages and flags on them. They're pretty fancy. It's a cool-looking but impractical novelty that predated the side-by-side by decades. Keep in mind that this is only 15 years or so since the first quad runner hit the trails. While it's still sort of a peak period for ATVs, most of the novelty buggies we see around here are custom-made pieces of artistic redneck ingenuity. From the crossing, the ride is 1 mile-ish, but it feels endless, and we have no idea where or why we're going. Looking through the lens of my middle-aged point of view, he's driving way too fast, but even then I was concerned. The climax is at the very end, when the trees part and we can see a railroad tie bridge up ahead, with no rails. And the driver doesn't even slow. In fact, he stomps on the gas to make it even more intense, and we all scream as we go across. It's an established reality that the faster you go, the smoother the bumps are. But in this case, I would have preferred the bumps. It's high. We make it to the other side, though, where he brakes hard and skids to a stop through the railroad gravel, to the unanimous cheer of our group. Everybody jumps out. Why are we here? It's where the stream meets the river, and where 2 bridge crossings converge. Green mountains surround us with a visual field that's ample. In a word, it's spacious. At the confluence, it's deep water. You get the idea what we're here for. Several concrete arches line the curved edge of where these 2 lines of water meet, and at this spot, near the middle of the curve, no fewer than 20, yes, 20 people tiptoed to the edge of this enormous structure in order to take the plunge. How high is it? Crazy high. Maybe it's the setting, the space of the mountains, the mystery of having never been here, the nerve-wracking ride we just took, or maybe it was the near-fatal jump that I had already taken earlier in the day. More on that later. Probably it was some combination of a little bit of all of these things, so I'm sitting this one out. Brandon was probably the most charismatic of our group. This kid was extremely personable. He was that type who just seemed to know people everywhere. This was mostly in part to his tragic upbringing, which forced him into being moved around a lot. He and I were old friends who met way before any of that, though. I don't really remember the details now, but while we were both still in our early preteens, he lost one parent to a car accident, and then within a couple of weeks he lost the other parent and a younger sibling to a house fire. Since the accident, Brandon had been moved around through the foster care system and had been shuttled through some rather uncaring relatives without being able to find any stability. He was sort of without home, as was I to a much lesser degree, and so we were fast friends. From the outside, he looked bad. Destiny had demanded that somebody like him should be ruined by cynicism, and yet somehow he managed to preserve one of the most cheerfully optimistic spirits I've ever encountered. He almost had a glow about him, a genuine good person, in spite of his scraggly appearance. Here's a quick example. Even though he was one of the most popular people I've ever met in my life, he had and kept a platonic relationship with this sort of homely, overweight girl who he considered as a good friend. To me, it was so strangely uncharacteristic for a selfish teenager to see another person for their inner beauty that I've not yet forgotten the lesson. I remember him telling me, "Not tonight because I have plans with whatever her name was." And I wasn't even disappointed because I thought it was such a nice gesture. Mind you, this was not a relationship of pity, but one of mutual respect. He liked her as a person. Not bad morality for some transient white trash. So, there are at least 20 of them, no exaggeration, all in a line along the edge. A countdown, and then the fall. Every single one of them jumped. Nobody chickened out. On the far right end, nearest to me as the group took the plunge, was Brendan, who gilded this lily with a backflip. The splash was magnificent, and the excitement of that sight still resonates with me now as I write my account of it, some decades later. No phones were there to capture the moment, but it's not a snapshot that can be lost. Their swim back was long and filled with distant, muffled, echoing cheers of pure exhilaration. Okay, let's go back up to Blue Hole, and I'll tell you about my own risky jump made earlier that day. The rocks nearest the swimming hole range in size from big to enormous. At the time of our story, much of the viney greenery that would normally be growing on top of them had been beaten back by all of the foot traffic, leaving the rock surfaces mostly bare. Some of these boulders are house-sized, and so they act as home to the various impromptu encampments of the day. The largest, with its ancient-looking fire ring, must have witnessed countless events during its experience with humanity. Most who jump now wear disparate patterned clothing, and they bring with them strange technologies. But the earlier jumpers would have been more modestly dressed in earth tones, and they would have used more natural methods to provide their comforts and entertainments. This earlier type were darker skinned on average, and there were far fewer of them. Strange how ages can change even the most immovable rock through slow erosion. To this old boulder, we are only the Earth's youngest children, who come to jump and take their quick laugh, and then they leave, allowing it to return to the peace of its impossibly slow roll. Centuries have passed since this beast was first freed of the ground and then split from the bedrock. An untold volume of water had to have washed through in order to carve it and undermine it from its bed enough to provoke it into exposure. In all these eons, the sky has turned light and dark, been silent and noisy, and become hot and cold. The water has been both high and low, and the one universal constant here, the boulder's single companion throughout it all, has been slow change. The scale of this rock's time defies the conceptual understanding of any 10-toed creature who's ever pitter-pattered around on its back. And yet, it is still only one piece in an endless succession. But let's look at a different rock. One memory that continues to intrude as I write this insists on being mentioned. Once, on another day and a subsequent trip, another old buddy of mine and I returned to this creek with a pair of our young girlfriends, who seemed somewhat less than impressed with it. We found a more private spot than Blue Hole, downstream along the water. It was on a large, flat piece of exposed bedrock that the creek was still trying to wear through. And there we made our camp, where we enjoyed an evening of freedom, complete with grilled food. You don't get to choose which memories will end up being the clearest images that comprise your recollections library. But for some reason, this memory is one of the forceful ones. Perhaps it's because Blue Hole had already become idealized for me by that time, and so I was proud to be able to share it. But I also think it was the feeling of luxury that I found pride in. Imagine the psychology of a young man who has virtually nothing to offer, yet he still wants to impress his uncertain new counterpart. Though there was barely enough money to pay for the trip's fuel, we somehow still managed to scrape together the provisions of cold drinks, warm burgers, fireside laughter, and campside beauty. Comforts like these were the high life. It's almost caveman, primal, that we find so much satisfaction in being able to provide. Of course, it's silliness that we want so badly to impress for the sake of our image, especially because, in retrospect, all that the girls really needed to be impressed was to find some honesty and kindness underneath all of that coarseness. But the fragile young mind doesn't yet understand that simple truth enough to allow itself to be exposed to any vulnerability. And so my ego continued on, for some many years, trying to persuade itself and others, by overcompensation, that it was adequate. And with that, we're back atop Blue Hole, and it's our first visit here. At roadside, we walk past an open hatchback that's parked near the main trail leading down. The car's pair of 12-inch speakers bumps sublime as we scuffle down the dusty path and onto the main rock, where the group of us stands in awe at the sight. The number of people running around is high enough that our party raises no eyebrows. There is no significance to our presence here at all, other than our being 4 more pairs of shoulders to avoid bumping into, while passing along the thin trails that weave together all the little rock-top groups. The energy of the place is informal and surprisingly friendly. It's party-centric. Alcohol is prominent and unashamed, but even here, pot smoking is still taking place on the side, a sort of almost private party thing. And honestly, on reflection, that's where pot went wrong. It was better as an occasional thing. At the time, it was still sacrosanct and countercultural. It was a minor ritual for friends. Now it's too celebrated. It's overprescribed, in your face, and excessive. And the strains are too strong now. The love for its simplicity has been lost. It's been trampled to death by foreign visitors. The culture in general of Blue Hole is all over the place, but the center of the bullseye is rural, white, half hippie and half country, but not quite the sort of deep country that flies a rebel rag, though I'm sure 1 or 2 of that type would have been present. The overarching theme here was civil lawlessness. And surprisingly, it seemed to do pretty well on its own. I never once saw a fight, nor did I ever participate in one. But who knows how many things happened there that day that would have been worth a paragraph here. I'll leave it to your imagination. Looking down into Blue Hole from the point jump side, the more seasoned jumpers are over there on the opposite side using the root jump to show off. This is because of several reasons. First, the root is growing on the top edge of a boulder that's a solid 30% higher than the point jump is. Second, the root is across the creek, so whenever you jump from it, everybody sees you. The root itself belongs to a large pine tree, from which dangles a thick bull rope. Since the boulder leading up to the root is so high, there's another bull rope hanging near it that assists the climb up from the water. Note in the accompanying visual that the root's tree has since fallen, but Blue Hole doesn't suffer much qualitatively from the loss, because there's a rope swing in a different spot now. I'm guessing that the root swing probably wasn't the first either. The new swing is a blast, but it's not part of our story, because it doesn't exist yet. While standing on the point and looking across, the root is slightly downstream and to our right. If we scan upstream along the cliff edge, nearly directly across from us is another rock jump that has about the same height as the point. Difference here is, This rock has a slender, climbable pine tree growing on top of it. Later, to my friends and I, whenever one of us referenced the tree, this is the one we were talking about. Scanning over the place, if one wanted to establish a reputation for oneself here, it was pretty clear how to do it quickly. Pine trees tend to have a coarse bark that will flake off rather easily when it's agitated. Where the bark rubs away, the exposed parts are lighter colored. Thus, the more heavily climbed parts of the tree are easily visible. Note that. Blue Hole was a playland for young people, and so the four of us had already dispersed in order to explore. I don't remember much of our first hour or so there, except that at some point, without saying anything, I had abandoned my friends and walked upstream to find a crossing that didn't require me to swim. Nobody was really interested as I started climbing the tree, except that I eventually heard one of my buddies point out that I was over there. A few branches up, I had already reached the pinnacle of Blue Hole's jumping spots. It was obvious by the bark that this was the attention grabber's branch, from which the bold had been causing people to stop whatever it is that they were doing in order to watch for some time. We love a spectacle. I'm not sure whether it's a design flaw or not. From one point of view, whenever we witness recklessness, it helps us to question our own behavior by forcing us to internalize the perspective of high risk vicariously. Makes us see how stupid risky behavior is, and all of us take some version of stupid risks in our own way. The thought helps us to value life for its precarity. But there's another way to see it too. To witness a person seemingly cast care aside is also to experience exhilaration vicariously, because it makes us confront the futility of our life's struggle. Memento mori is the Latin expression. It means, remember that you will die. Admitting our impermanence, our smallness, is an insightful enrichment that reveals to us life's value for a different reason. This time by displacing the ego with the reality of our unimportantness. Simply put, learn to be here, now, and appreciate it, without worrying about how people perceive you, because soon both you and they will be gone. That height wasn't good enough, and so up I went, above where the bark had been loosened, and to where the bark was barely touched at all. Now they were paying attention. It's difficult to admit truth, especially because I have since become so lucky in life, but at the time I had been desperate. No, that's a euphemism. Again with the ego. The memoirist in me wants to pad reality and tell you a story that's more relatable and meaningful. But that's not the truth. The truth is that I was both careless and suicidal, and that I was in no state of mind that can be understood through explanation. The reality is that I'm now describing a different creature than your present narrator, and in fact, the two of us have almost nothing in common except for our shared memory of this tree climb. I will admit to you that I feel sorry for him, but I want no pity for myself, and this is because I am not that person. Nothing about me is worthy of pity, but that poor kid in the tree has no idea how tough the rest of his climb is going to be. How could I not pity him? He actually sees his existence as being expendable, because he has no idea of how much better it will become. There's nothing I can tell him. There's no way I can go back and communicate to him just how much he stands to miss. Yet I'm afraid that even if I were given the opportunity, I wouldn't be able to convince him to come down. It still wasn't high enough. If you think I'm stalling this story just in order to build tension, you're right. And that's also exactly what I did on that day, too. It took me 15 minutes at least to ascend that tree. By the time I was all the way to the top, nobody watching still actually believed that I'd jump. About 1/3 of the way up, the tree was Blue Hole's most impressive jump. But 2/3 up, that was insane. I was now the full 3/3 up, to where no bark had ever been touched at all, and to where the tree only had one branch above the one I now stood on that was any thicker than my thumb. The mob below was growing restless. They were becoming annoyed because they weren't getting to enjoy the spectacle that they had been expecting. Expectation is the fastest way to disappointment. That's exactly why I told you at the beginning of this story to lower your expectations in advance. Now they were expecting for me to shimmy back down soon, because I'd been sitting up in that crow's nest for a solid 5 minutes, just holding on to the now as tightly as I could. I knew that I would be later recounting this experience one day, if I survived it. I had already decided that I would jump when I first crossed the creek. There was no going back down, no matter their jeers. "He's not jumping. Just do it, faggot. He won't do it. No fucking way." Then came the big one that I won't ever forget. "Just do it, you fucking pussy." Immediately, Bobby snapped. "Shut the fuck up, asshole. I don't see your fat ass up in that tree." The whole Blue Hole laughed. And that guy didn't say shit. Bobby was pretty tough, and even I could see that his face had turned red from being pissed off. He was probably scared for me enough to get defensive. Sometimes it's nice to have friends. I never told him how much that defense warmed my heart. It made my confidence swell to the point where there was absolutely no way I was going back down. It's hard to imagine making a decision so resolutely. It was as though I was free from choice, and I was just going through the motions. It was like being on a ride. There's no better way to see how fragile you really are than to accept that you have already jumped. One can grant a sort of tentative acceptance of the illusory nature of time, and in doing so, briefly suspend the misleading feeling of authorship. Control is the power that we covet, and yet we have none of it that can hold permanent sway. We all end up destroying ourselves by different means anyhow. Even the life of pure, health-obsessed reservation is only a short-sighted existence of self-promotion. Being too careful is to live only in service of vanity. You aren't that important. So lighten up and feel the sun and the breeze. In the air, during free fall, time slows and ego ceases. Every head was up. They were all watching now, everyone. Rage Against the Machine started playing. It was a circus-level spectacle. I sucked in as much of that moment as a person can get from one. But I finally had had my fill and let go of the little branch. I leaned forward and jumped to the opening of Bomb Track. Right at that exact intense moment where the music drops, right when Woody Harrelson elbows the prison guard after the dirty joke. Time seems to slow in midair. From the top, you can't see the water where you're going to hit. Much of it is sort of a leap of faith in physics, because the tree branches obscure any view of the water surface directly underneath. Earlier on in my description, I cut the tree's height into 3 parts. On the descent, 1/3 of the way down, the branches part, and then the full reality hits. Though it felt as though I was almost down now, once I could see under and through the branches, the full, terrifying height hit me like a trainload of humility. The second train wreck was the impact force of the water, which instantly stung my feet like a whip crack, even through my shoes. It left the undersides of my arms ringing with pain for the next few hours. Though the water was deep there, I still hit the creek floor with surprising weight. It was enough to hurt a knee or an ankle, but I was tough enough to take it. Not that I would have felt any pain through the adrenaline and attention anyhow. I emerged a new local celebrity. It was that 15 minutes of fame a person gets once in their lifetime. But more than being impressed, I think the audience was just satisfied that peace had been returned. And further, that the police weren't there taking statements from witnesses. Talk about a potential buzzkill. Believe it or not, we still haven't made it to the highest point in this story. Maybe I'll save that for my final reflection. I still have yet to make the point I set out to make in the first place. Let's work on that point right now. See, the story started out with my being totally lost, and finding Blue Hole became a sort of marker of success, an achievement, an orienting symbol that helped to establish my young identity. The point is abstract and sounds weird, and it's hard to explain. So if I can't get you to get what I'm trying to communicate here, that's okay, because the more important point is going to be simple. Blue Hole became an ideal. But ideals lead to disappointment, because they never seem to live up to your expectations. Try not to expect anything. Rather, simply enjoy and appreciate what's right in front of you. I'm not saying you should give up on trying to improve your circumstances. You already know that I'm constantly tinkering with everything in my endless effort to improve every design I can get my grubby hands on. It's not me to just give up. What I am telling you is that a lower standard of expectation allows one to become, receptive to all of those sub-ideal pleasures that are way more easily obtainable. For example, the little swimming hole that my wife and I now visit, it's no Blue Hole, but it is close to home and incredibly private. And so it has become one of our great joys, because when we did find it, we were expecting to find nothing. We'd simply stepped off the path to see what's back there. And what we found back there is a simple pleasure. Path is not a concept that a dog can understand. The way to where they want to go is only obstructions or a lack of them. Where the way forward is obstructed, the dog simply goes around by altering his course according to the new information. The decision is spontaneous, and the journey is not premeditated. There's a wisdom in this simplicity. Take, for example, a human child and a young chimpanzee of the same age who are both presented with a treat that's inside of a transparent box. With a stick, we demonstrate how to tap ceremoniously on the top of the acrylic box 3 times, and then we remove the reward. The child watches and then repeats in perfectly serious form. But when it's the chimp's turn, she skips all the stick tapping altogether and simply removes the treat. Tell me, which one of the two has already become ensnared by a pointlessly assumed concept? So too do we walk on our paths when no such precept actually exists. The path is only the most immediately apparent, easy way forward. But there is no physical constraint that binds us to it. Neither is it truly defined in any real sense. It is only an imaginary determination of our journey, a template, a dotted line in our heads, an abstraction to which we are not bound by anything other than our belief that it somehow dictates our way forward by presenting us with a destination. Funny thing is, with what little control we have, we should be determining our own paths, and in doing so, trying to follow as few dotted lines as possible. The path down to Blue Hole was closed some years back. I don't know exactly when, because I wasn't aware of it, but immovable barriers were placed in order to keep cars away, and the area went from theme park level chaos to becoming a remote stretch of nothing that's completely inaccessible to visitors. I had figured that its end was inevitable, because there is no way that such a place could continue to self-govern as it was doing in today's sue over a splinter sissy culture. I mean, the number of broken bones that happened there alone must have been a staggering statistic. Some of those rocks would be dangerous even if they weren't soaking wet with spilled beer. My life went on without Blue Hole, and having already had my share of fun there, I wrote it off as not much of a loss to hear that it was off limits now. If people were still going there, it wasn't going to be the place that I'd want to visit as an adult anyhow. Figured it must be filled with trash, and so it's no longer worth going. And so, 25 years or so pass by. And then an old buddy of mine brings up the unresolved issue. Admittedly, I was curious. We devised a plan to come in through the back side and avoid all the nonsense of being chased away altogether. The other side of the holler was nothing but woods. It's a somewhat long journey, and naturally, you will have to step off of the path. But it's worth it. Turned out that the place had been sealed away in time, exactly as it was in my memory. And when we arrived, I couldn't believe it. But it was empty. Not a single person there. We had it all to ourselves. Most things in life aren't as good when returning to them. If you doubt this claim, I dare you to spend the money on some ridiculously overpriced movie theater popcorn. Whether we're talking about once-read books, old VHS movies, vintage games that are now regarded as classics, or a pizza place that you remember being otherworldly delicious, things just don't seem as magical upon return visits. See if you can guess why. Yep, that's right, because we establish expectations from our positive experiences. And so we end up imposing disappointment upon ourselves. But following a quarter century's worth of disappointing experiences, I was expecting to find Blue Hole a complete letdown. For fuck's sake, was I wrong? It was pristine. Images don't even do it justice. And maybe it is my own romantic bias that sees it in this way, but what a beautiful experience. The water was warm silk that looked a dirty teal in the sunlight. And the surroundings were deep, rich, exotic-looking and verdant. Waterfalls line the approach, and downstream a mountain face marks the valley's turn. The rocks intimidate and provoke the imagination, just enough to give rise to excitement. Being there is the sensation of arriving instead of wanting to go. It's the sensation of being there. The feeling is like, I made it. I'm here. It's the now, captured and displayed here for any appreciator of timeless beauty. Ages past touch this place, allowing the earth's youngest children to soak temporarily in the entertainments of old, while there's still time for us to do so. See, we don't get to enjoy the luxury of getting to experience actual timelessness, because unlike Blue Hole, you and I are bound to time's finite path. Doesn't matter. Plunge in, and for a moment, aging stops, time stops. I briefly became again that person who I no longer am, and I found a glimpse of commonality with him, a camaraderie, perhaps through our shared appreciation for the place. The sentiment was one of appreciation now instead of pity or resentment or disappointment. I appreciate his misery now, because when that had finally subsided, he was gone, and my pleasant life remained in his place. I owe all of my comfort, even the very indulgence of this appreciation, to someone who no longer exists. If he wouldn't have made that jump, maybe I wouldn't even be here. I certainly wouldn't be saying this right now. But for the love of decency, I would not want to return to being him. Talk about second-time experience disappointment. I mean, it would suck to be in his skin again. Aside from losing the back pain, of course. Not incidentally, the asshole gave me that, too. Point is, I've already been on every step of every path he's ever been down, and I have no interest in walking it again. Been there, being here, going there. Most of life gets spent in a state of been going to be there. We've all been planning to do things, but the present is a path that prefers to keep us here in permanently suspended anticipation. The irony is that while we're waiting, we forget that we're actually still in the now. Today, now, as I write on this sunny August Thursday morning, I'm planning on doing two things. First, I want to close this story off. And second, I'm going to go to Blue Hole with the missus, probably for our last visit of the season. One of the day's goals is to capture some images for you, and if things went well, you'll be looking at one right now. As you do, please be reminded that a snapshot doesn't do it justice, especially not with respect to scale. Consider that the point jump alone is 13 feet to the water. Add to that height the distance from your toes to your eyes, and you'll get a better feeling for just what a nice jump it is. And from the point, looking up to that little seat you'll see in the tree, even though it looks pretty modest, that's a solid 22 feet from the water. And it's where the thick jumping branch used to be. Trust me when I tell you that 22 feet high is much higher in first-person point of view than it is from the ground. We expect, from the ground, that we could face a dangerous jump with confidence and dignity. Expectation, get ready to meet disappointment. A few of the ideas that I've discussed here have been deliberately planted in more than one place throughout. My wife is fond of telling me that whenever you give a presentation, if you want people to remember anything from it, you should 1. Tell them what you are going to tell them. 2. Tell them what you want to tell them. And 3. Tell them what you told them. So please, excuse any redundancy as I continue to drill this stuff into your head. You won't realize it when you're taking your last trip to Blue Hole. You won't realize that you're jumping from the point or stepping out of the water for the last time. While something's still happening, the future feels full of endless potential. And for the world, it is. It just isn't endless for you. So stay in the now as much as you can, because it slips through your fingers even faster when you aren't paying any attention to it. I'm under the tension of going there right now, because there's an anticipation of being there hovering over me that could potentially draw me away from the moment. But that gravity isn't real, because the path I plan to walk today doesn't dictate the steps I choose to take right now any more than I allow it to. I am here, now, writing. Blue Hole is no longer my ideal, because writing this is, now. And you are here, now too, listening. By default, you want to think that you're on downtime right now, as though your life is somehow on pause because you're listening to a story about Blue Hole, and so your real life isn't important at the moment. But it is at the moment, and it is important, and you are in the now. Wake up for just a moment. Look down at your hands. You probably forgot that they were even there because you've been in your mind, lost in thought and distraction. You forgot that you are a thinking thing who is having a conscious experience. You weren't realizing that you are a material object that's become aware of itself, a piece of the universe who has noticed that it is enmeshed within a framework, a reality. You are a being that is there, here. The feeling of going there today doesn't knock me away from my awareness of the present. In fact, it sort of enriches it. The anticipatory feeling is one more sensation that I'll recognize, enjoy, and then allow to pass. I do not give it the power to dictate my behavior. We sometimes call this sort of restraint executive function, and it's one of the benefits of having a frontal lobe. It allows us to delay gratification in order to hold out for something better. But the real trick to using your brain is in realizing that there is nothing better, and that the anticipation now is just as nice a reward as the reward itself will be. Don't get caught waiting. That's just the path to nowhere. Time slows in midair, and the ego ceases. What if we could hold on to that sensation? We can. First, we fix on a point, our ideal. The jump, the air, the rush, the pure sensory experience of having a complete absence of choice and self. If we can be in the now there and then we can be in the now anywhere, anytime. Allow that spot to expand outward. Let the ideal grow to become all of 𝑉𝑒-℉_ol_e, and then let it consume the whole day, the whole summer, ideally the whole of life. The ideal becomes an anchor, a point from which we allow the timelessness thought to grow in both directions, forward and back. The climb, the jeers, the jump, the swim back, and all of the cheers. Capture it all. Stay in it. Stay there on the journey home and in bed that evening, even as you drift into dream over the jump made earlier that day. You can even learn to appreciate the now while that annoying ankle blister from your water shoe rubs against your sock as you write. All of it is pure sensation to which you can anchor. The best part of a trip to the swimming hole is the walk home. And that's when you notice how therapeutic it all has been. There's a sedative effect that accompanies you back. Part of it is the break that you finally get from the hours and hours of waterfall sound. So everything sounds quiet, feels smooth, seems peaceful. Of course, exhaustion has something to do with this too. But it's also the tranquility of anticipation ceasing. That is, as long as you remember to bring snacks with you. Don't end up walking home hungry at the end of a tough day, or you'll be stuck in the going there mentality the whole time, and that would be totally forgivable. The title of this piece of content will probably be "Don't Stay on the Path," or something like that, because that's what I've been telling myself again and again over the last 20-some years. And that philosophy has been good to me. But it's not the real gem to be learned here. The piece of perspective that I really want to share with you is this. There is no destination. What matters is where you are, and wherever you go won't be all that much better. In fact, usually, if the grass is greener over there, it's because you aren't over there turfing it up. And finally, the most important insight that I have for you to remember, and what probably should be the title here, is this. There is no path. A path is only a collection of old footprints that has been left by others. Don't let it dictate your steps to you now. It sounds too obvious to say, but you have to remember to step off of the path where you suspect it could be rewarding to do so. It won't be obvious while you're being presented with the opportunity, because your instinct will be to resist. The path offers comfort by laying itself before you as the known, the familiar, the quantifiable. And yet, all of its certainty is illusory. You will not know it while you're taking your last step on or off the path. Careful. Use the path where it is useful. Keep the goal in mind. Seek not originality. Don't look to be unique unless being genuine requires you to be so. Originality has no intrinsic value. It's only ego that wants to carve out a special identity. Only ego wants to jump from the highest branch. Plenty of old, worn paths continue to offer value. Plenty of low jumps are still lots of fun. As such, Don't be unnecessarily contrarian. Being too bold is the same as being careless. Stay on the path for as long as it is still being useful to you. Use it to find the best places to step off. And enjoy every moment of ease it offers you now in the meantime. The obstinate trailblazer imagines himself finding El Dorado or the fountain of youth, but usually he just ends up stuck in muck or jagger bushes. Don't let me dissuade you, though. Just remember that stepping off means having more than a few thorns stuck in your leg. In order to find Blue Hole, there were stinging nettles, poison ivy, ticks, and rattlesnakes to be considerate of. No reward is without risk. Before I set out to take snapshots, I wanted to tell you about the high point of the story, as promised. As far as I knew, nobody had ever jumped into Blue Hole from such a height as I had, at least at the time. The ego loves to be a record holder, even when it's a title of pure recklessness. But along with the illusions of time and paths and destinations and promises of a more perfect future, there are no truly highest points either. Remember that last little branch? The thumb-sized one that I clutched onto until I jumped? Who would ever think that it could actually support a person's weight? Well, really, it turned out that it couldn't. Later in that summer, on one of our many trips back, Brandon had his own time-stopping moment in the top of that tree. From the ground point of view this time, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He stood slowly up from that little branch, holding it with one hand as his other hand raised up to balance out his weight. Just a finger was left touching the branch at first, and then his knees straightened, and he held onto nothing for the tiniest possible instant until he jumped outward. The flexible treetop snapped back as he splayed forward into freefall, and the moment he did, that little branch snapped off, permanently setting his record. For now. Thanks for listening, but now I'm going to Blue Hole.